As we all know that a curious task of economics is learning about incentives and trade-offs. There are also winners and losers following the enactment of any policy. Our economy has stalled for many years because of bad policy by the government, especially in transportation. Taxis have been in the industry for many years now. Their dominance is not market determined, but is due to inadequate policymaking that would usher in path-breaking technological changes in the transportation industry. In a span of 30 years, it is implausible that only one mode of transport is dominant, not if there's absolute freedom available for everyone to innovate and introduce new modes of transport and see how the market reacts to their ideas. In South Africa, though, the lionization of the transport industry by taxis has been made possible by the wrong-headed idea of taxi bosses that they have a monopoly in wealth creation. The government as an institution has allowed this to happen by distributing the market share and power disproportionately to the hands of the taxi bosses to a dangerous extent that the taxi robber barons feel they have a monopoly in generating wealth from the transport industry. As a consequence, other transport modes or alternatives have had their growth potential compromised to the nation's detriment. Think about rail transport and Uber operators who have been victimized through rent-seeking and assault on our railways. An Uber operator is an attack on the nation and deprivation of economic growth. It is taking place in almost similar fashion to how the robber barons of the 18th century opposed creative destruction brought by the Industrial Revolution. They anticipated themselves as would-be losers from the industrialization and mechanization. The Industrial Revolution was going to reallocate wealth to better and modern means of production and relegate existing means of production to obsolescence. The robber barons formed opposition against key players in industrialization, such as John Kay and James Hargreaves. But why did industrialization carry on, even though the people who opposed it consisted of powerful aristocrats and monarchs? It is by the reason of the fact that the middle class in Britain was socially conscious, and the distribution of power by the institutions was even, which rendered robber barons unable to go out of their own ways to totally blocking industrialization. In the case of South Africa, taxi bosses enjoy dangerously huge amounts of trading privileges in transportation. As a consequence, South Africa has paid a huge price for it through huge amounts of violence and murders among the taxi operators, lack of innovation and diversification in transportation. In South Africa, what specific institutions are responsible for distributing power among economic participants in transportation? I believe that it is the Department of Transport or Trade and Industry. They haven't been distributing power in a manner that is inclusive because newcomers face formidable obstacles to entry, such as violence and forceful rent collections. We need to annihilate their unscrupulous power accumulation through a variety of means by reviving, diversifying, and investing in other forms of transportation. In response to this, they would most probably show vehement opposition by using their reputation of violence in order to insulate their trading privileges. But it would not be a winning battle if you don't, at the same time, capacitate the police with proper training that would enable them to face the taxi hooligans head-on when they start mounting nationwide violent pressure against the people and the economy at large. Since they have blanketed the whole transport industry with their dominance, they wouldn't allow this privilege to shrink without bloodshed and warfare if it came down to it. So a wise policymaker would have to account for those worst-case scenarios. I am convinced that the national police at the current moment are overmatched by the force of any form of nationwide revolt. A glaring example of what I'm talking about is the 2021 July riots and lootings that saw the country descending into chaos and breakdown of law and order, which was an attack on our civilization. I mean, wealth has changed since the times out of mind, which explains why many of the world's richest people 100 years ago do not possess that wealth today. But to the taxi mafia, wealth must be fixed on their hands for indefinite amounts of time, which has set us back by making us miss out on other modes of transport that could have afforded us more convenience at fairer prices. Every industry should be open to the participation of all traders. Therefore, I'm calling for the transformation that would enable the sprouting of new ideas and innovation. Such innovation and new ideas will not come from the taxi bosses, but from newcomers. It is therefore important that we make it not difficult for the newcomers to enter and introduce their ideas to the market. By so doing, as policymakers, we're acting in the best interest of the public. We should champion any policymaking that seeks to greatly expand the public's access to a wide-ranging transport options. An over-dependence on taxis stifles innovation. Due to the purposive incapacitation of other transport modes, even trucking companies now use roads to transport their cargo. This is negatively consequential for our roads because they break down easily. With the current design of the transport industry, ever-increasing taxi fares are inevitable. This is bad for many South Africans languishing in poverty and subsistence-level incomes. The current design and institutions underpinning it is not responsive to the economic needs of the population. When we lament the increase in taxi fares, we are indirectly expressing ourselves in the form of wishing that there were other transport modes to go to avoid paying exorbitant taxi fares. Taxi bosses are fully aware that the price elasticity of demand plays in their favor, that they can raise their prices without seeing any noticeable change in the customer base. That means that the pricing mechanism that they use to charge their taxi fares is arbitrarily uniform. They know that we've got nowhere to go if they jack up their prices because other transport modes have been systemically repressed. Within the South African population, there are men and women of great talent who can introduce innovation to the transport industry. However, there are no incentives to motivate them to enter and experiment with their ideas in a manner that will greatly benefit the nation. And the government has no interest in protecting them against threats of violence and intimidation by the unappointed gatekeepers of the transport industry. In contemporary South Africa, the conditions in which the taxi industry operates is monopolistic in nature on the reason that their pricing mechanism is rigid. Second, they operate outside of the realm of the government and regulations that every South African abides by, except for them. As a result, it will be not well thought out to expect the taxi wackos to restrain themselves. We have created a dilemma for ourselves, whereby we have left the taxi industry to their own devices. They now charge exorbitant prices, and they are blocking entry of more efficient competitors and new technology through violent means in the transport sector. Now everyone, including the government itself, is afraid of the taxi mafia. In the face of the taxi overlords, functions of democracy and economic freedom collapse, which is a sad reality. It also explains why institutions that are tasked with practicing democracy, such as the media and those tasked with granting economic freedom, fail at restraining the taxi overlords from violently stamping out any element that threatens their transport market dominance. In my personal conviction, the media hasn't been adequately vocal about the feral dominance of the taxi lords, and that has meant that policymakers and the general public are not aware of the true extent of power and its accompanied abuse carried out by the taxi industry. We are guilty of such abandonment of principles of the Constitution without justification. It is our constitutional mandate to protect the taxi industry from anyone whose intent is to erode the economic freedoms of all participants. No participant in any sort of market should have the ability to remove all the constitutional constraints that are reasonably placed upon them. Now we have made a grave mistake in allowing the taxi overlords the ability to strip themselves of these constraints, and they have evolved into this one towering, monstrous, giant force against innovation and the rule of law in the transport market. History is replete with examples of institutions having the power to block technological advancements being introduced to the benefit of societies in general, from the Roman period to modern-day South Africa, exemplified by the taxi industry. If we're ambitious about seeing growth, and diversification in the transport industry. New ways of doing things and new technologies are needed, and those would not come from the bearers or owners of existing technology, but from newcomers. There is nothing peculiar about what happens next. What will happen is creative destruction. But economics is about teaching us that trade-offs exist, whether we like it or not. Me calling for greater innovation in transportation places focus where it should be. Anything that opposes innovation and competition is against humanity, civilization, and human progress.